This clip will demonstrate how to build a budget using Microsoft Excel. So on the left hand side here I have an organization called the Navan Nutrition Society, and it's trying to build a budget for 2021. And we know that the various amounts of income it will take in each month that are constant will be membership subscriptions of 2,200, conference income of 1,540, and so on. So these amounts will be the same for each of the 12 months. Likewise, the expenditures it expects to make will also be constant, will be fixed each month, starting with insurance at 1,140 and down as far as the other category of 640. So they're the items of expenditure and income that are going to be constant or the same for each of the 12 months. The other thing we need to be aware of is that there's a bank balance of 11,700 at the start of the year. That's the expected bank balance. So over on my right hand side I have an Excel spreadsheet where I plan to build the budget. So there's a block of cells here that are colored blue, and using those cells I'm going to bring in the initial values for each of the incomes and the expenditures. So I'm just going to copy the block of cells or the block of data here from the Word document and paste it into the corresponding cells in the spreadsheet. There's my income sources, and now I'm going to bring in my expenditure. So anchor myself in cell B13 here from the top leftmost cell and paste in the values. And lastly, I'll bring in the initial balance of 11,700. That's going into cell C1. So now I have all the raw material for my budget, so I'm going to ignore the Word document in a moment. But the first part of the Word document is saying, based on the information provided above, draw up a monthly cash budget for 2021. And we're assuming that the various items of income and expenditure remain constant for each of the 12 months. So that's what I've explained already. So now if I maximize my spreadsheet, I can start building the budget. The key point in the spreadsheet is that this block of cells that I've just populated with the data from the Word document are the values. So each of those cells contains a value, contains a number or a label. And down here for my budget, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw upon the data that's stored in the block of cells from A3, we'll say, with the reference number 1 there, down as far as cell C24. So my 8 items of income and my 12 items of expenditure. And in the budget, in this area here from, say, row 30 down, I'm not going to be typing in any values. So I'm not going to be typing in 11. I'm just not going to copy 11,700 and suddenly paste it down here, because I now have a value in that cell, as you can see, rather than a cell reference. So in my budget, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to either have formulae or cell references. So the plan is that should I change one of those amounts of money, that the spreadsheet will automatically recalculate and reflect the adjusted value. So in the spreadsheet, I have the items again, the various items of income and expenditure numbered to make it easy to follow. So the income amounts are, the labels are up here in starting in B3. So again, I could copy and paste if I wished, but it's handy for me to put in a cell reference. So B3 is a cell reference for the first item, and if I fill that down, then it'll bring all the labels down for me. So the last label there, as you can see, is other, and there in slot 8 it's other as well. Likewise with the expenditures, same approach. I could copy and paste the labels down, but I'm going to use the cell references instead. So I pick the top leftmost of those, the insurance, and put it into cell B44, and again fill down. So you can see here that there's a cell reference there of B13. So I fill that down to the remaining rows. So I have all my labels in place. Next, I want to start with the numbers. So as I said at the start, the opening balance for this organization is 11,700. It's stored in cell C1. So if I anchor myself or place my cursor in cell C29 where it's looking for the opening balance, and then put a cell reference equals and the C1, then I can display the 11,700. So now I have a cell reference here again rather than a value. So this gives my spreadsheet a lot of flexibility and a lot of scope to change information as the if I want to revise some of my values. Then I have my member subscriptions, and as I said, they're going to be 2,200 each month. So in cell C32 or C30, yeah, C32, I want the information for the various items of income and expenditure to be displayed. So I have to be aware of the fact that as well as filling down, in this case, I also want to fill across. In other words, I want 2,200 to appear for each month of the year. So if I say equals and I click on C3 and I don't use any dollar signs, the 2,200 will appear fine. I'll be able to fill it down for the next few months, or the next few rows rather, for the other items, and they all look fine. So that seems to be grand. But when I go to fill it right, I suddenly end up with a problem. In other words, if I look at the first cell, so my original cell was C3, the next cell is going to say D3. The following one for March, I'm going to say E3, F3. So what's happening here is that, whereas I prefer to refer to column C all the time, because that's where my values are stored, my planning values are stored, Excel, when I fill right, anticipates that I want to refer to cell D, column D rather, column E, column F. But I don't want that. So I've made a mistake, therefore, in my initial cell reference here in cell C32. So I'm going to undo some of the work. Back as far as the initial cell reference. So I now have C3 up here in the editing line, and I use the appropriate mix of dollar signs. So I press F4 and I make my cell reference an absolute address. In other words, where both the C and the 3 are both locked. So if I were to use that approach, I'll get my 2,200 going across the way for the 12 months, which looks fine, but it won't go down. It'll also go down the way rather than getting the conference fees, which are 1,540. So I've made another mistake. So I'll go back again, press F4 again. I now have $C3 or $3. And the problem with that is that will allow the C to become a D or an E if I use that approach, and it'll always lock on row 3. So I don't want that. So my next approach is my next solution is to look at $C3. So $C3 means I have the C part of the formula locked or fixed. It'll always refer to column C, and the 3 can become a 4 or a 5 or a 6 as it requires. So I'll try this one and see what happens. So if I fill it down, it looks good because it's picking up all the appropriate numbers. In other words, it's linking to the appropriate cells here in between rows C3 and C or cell C3 and C10. And likewise, when I fill it to my right, it does the same thing. It picks up the appropriate cell reference. So if I now look at, say, just click on my initial cell here, I'll just color it yellow. This is the cell where I built my initial formula. When I filled it down, the $C3 became a $C4, C5, C6 as required. So that's looking good. And then likewise, when I filled it to my right, the $C3 remained $C3 for the membership subscriptions. So that's looking fine. So both my filling down and my filling right are correct. So I'll skip down to the expenditure items before I do the other calculations. And for the expenditure, it's the same approach. So I anchor myself in cell C44. And I say equals to start my formula there. And then I go back up to the cell C13. And again, the default position is that C13 is just the basic cell reference C13. So I need to go now go through the various possibilities again. So I can either lock it entirely, both the C and the 13, which I don't want, as you saw up above. I can lock the row but not the column, which I don't want either. The approach I want is where I lock the column. I fix the column on column C, and I allow the row to vary between 13, 14, 15. So if this worked for the income sources a moment ago, it should also work for the expenditure items. So I'll now fill down for the remaining expenditures, and we have the correct values there, all showing. And again, because the amounts of money are constant each month, they float across equally successfully. So again, I've entered one cell reference there in cell C44, and then use that as the basis of populating all the other cells. So this is why dollar signs and the absolute cell referencing, the dollar sign approach, is very, very useful in Microsoft Excel. So the other cell I've put a formula into here is the opening balance. So I'll just reference that and just to remind myself with the yellow background that it's also that I created that cell reference. Okay, after that, we need to work out the total income for each month. So the total income is going to be the sum of the 8 items here, membership subscriptions down as far as other. And we want to sum them up, so we use the auto sum feature. Again, we avoid typing if possible. So we use auto sum, and Excel anticipates the rows we want. So it wants the items between C32 and C39, and that's correct. So all I need to do is press return. And that's my total income, which I'll just make bold to make it obvious. And if I fill that to my right, it will tot up the incomes for all the other 11 months. So each month I'm taking in 8,810. So again, I created my formula here for January, and then I replicated it across the way using the crosshair. For my total available, I want to be able to take my opening balance and add on my total income. So that's going to be a simple calculation where we say equals, and we start with the opening balance, and then we go plus the total income. The total income cell is C40, so I'll just type the C40 plus the cursor is just slightly in my way. So that's C40, and I get total available of 2510. And again, I'll make that bold. And like all the other formulas so far, I float over the cell. When the white cross appears, that just means I'm selecting the cell. When the black crosshair appears, it means I'm able to replicate the formula across the way, or down if need be. So in this case, I'm going to go across for the remaining months, and I get the totals for the other months, total available. Now again, this value is initially slightly incorrect because I'm missing the opening balances up here for February, March, April. So the 8,810 there is currently inaccurate, but it'll correct itself in a few minutes when I fix up the opening balance for February. So likewise, my total expenditure, I want to sum up the values between cell C44 and C55. So up to my sum function again, choose sum, and this time it anticipates that I want to include row 56 as well. So if you look at my formula, the suggested formula Excel is offering me, it's offering me C44 up as far as C56. But my data actually ends in C55, so I'm going to just manually edit the 5 so it becomes, the 6, so it becomes a 5 instead. So it's now C44 to C55, which is the range of cells I want. So I press return, and that gives me my total expenditure for the month of January. I'll bold that, and again I'll float over the cell. I don't use the white cross because that just selects the stuff. I instead use the black crosshair, and the black crosshair enables me to replicate the similar formula all the way across. So if you look at the second formula, that's the sum of D44 to D55. That's for February. And then I go over to December, and it'll be the sum of N44 to N55. So it's summing up the expenditures for each month. And I'll just make that bold, or make that yellow as well to remind myself that I totted it up. So that's my total expenditure. So I'm just going to put an underline on the various money amounts here so it becomes clearer what they're about. So I'm adding up those items. That'll make it slightly easier to follow. So the final thing to do is to calculate the closing balance. And the closing balance is going to be the total available minus the total expenditure. So the total available is for January is 2510, and the total expenditure is 9105. So my closing balance is going to be the cell reference C44. So I go equals C41 rather, the total available, minus the total expenditure, minus the C57. So my closing balance for the month of January is 11,405. And my closing balance for the month of January automatically becomes my opening balance for the month of February. So I just go up to February and I say equals, and then I refer back down to C58, the closing balance for January. And I then fill that to my right. And so as I fill that to my right, watch all of my, watch row 41 in particular, and the way the numbers will change there to reflect my new calculations. So as you can see already, the total available for February is now 2215. And as I fill to my right, it's going to change for March, April, May, all the way across to December. So that's C58. So D58 hasn't been yet filled in. So they're displaying zeros currently because the closing balance value down here hasn't been calculated for the remaining months. So if I now fill across the closing balance calculation with the black crosshair, that will automatically correct the opening balances for March to December as well. So now, as you can see, that the closing balance for January here, which I'll just give it a different shade. Okay, the closing balance for January, just to highlight it with a different color, is the opening balance for February. So they match up. The closing balance for February becomes the opening balance for March, and so on. So that's how the spreadsheet works. The cell references enable you to pull the data from the various places and do the calculations. So a quick recap. What I've done here, I'm just going to unshade those again just to make them clearer, is that each place I've built a formula, I've colored it yellow. So I built one there for the closing balance, and I also have a cell reference up here for the February opening balance. So in this spreadsheet, to do the forecast for the 12 months, on the basis that the values are constant, that the amount of money we pay out each month for the various items and that we take in each month for the various incomes, that remains constant. So by entering a few simple formulae that I've been able to replicate, I can complete the spreadsheet very quickly. So that's how to use or to wisely use absolute and relative cell addresses in Microsoft Excel to build a budget. That's the end of the clip.